Hi, and welcome to my talk titled Advanced Unity Development and Project Organization. I'm so glad you are attending this year's Global Mixed Reality Bootcamp, which is a great event, and I'm more so glad that you are attending my session. Now, at the time of this recording, the official schedule for the event hasn't been released yet, so I don't know whether you have already seen my other session, maybe, or whether you are seeing my face for the first time. So I will just start afresh and introduce myself. My name is Dino. I'm a full stack software engineer living in Germany, passionate about UI, UX, agile development, and all things mixed reality. I've started working with mixed reality technologies back in 2016 when the first HoloLens generation launched. A very exciting time and still is. In my day to day job, I work at Media Lesson, a software company in Germany that works with clients in automotive, industrial, event, and many other industries. I implement immersive experiences in VR or AR or mixed reality that actually solve problems for our customers. Now, in my remaining time, I like to work on small indie games, for example, or contribute to open source projects such as the Mixed Reality Toolkit. If you want to learn more about myself and what I do, then I will make sure to post my social media handles at the end of the presentation and we can get in touch. Now, what is today's talk about? We want to take a look at the vanilla project organization tools that come with Unity and how we can use them to organize our project a little bit better than most of the people do. We want to take a look at some other tools as well from custom sources that we can use to organize our project. And we want to take a look at some coding techniques or tools to make your project maintainable, scalable, and improve your overall coding architecture. So let's get started. All right, let's take a look at the default Unity editor search capabilities and what we can use it for. By the way, for this talk, I'm using a project I created. I'm going to be building it for several sessions and it's open source on GitHub. I just call it Spatial Invaders. I'm planning to do a sort of small game with it that works on different mixed reality platforms. And I'm just going to use it throughout this talk and my other talks to demonstrate what I'm talking about. I will post a link at the end of the presentation so you can check it out, and contributions are obviously welcome. So back to the topic. What is Unity Editor Search? It's a text-based search you can use to find specific game objects by name, for example, or by type. I mean, you're not looking up the game object by type, but you are looking up game objects that are using a specific type, for example. The search is very useful for this because I'm very often seeing beginners or even people that have been using Unity for a while. I'm seeing them unfold the hierarchy, click through the game objects, and finding game objects that are using a specific component, or when they need to multi select a lot of game objects. For example, like in this screenshot, the motherships, they will all actually hold control and then select each of them and so on and so forth. But you can actually just find all of the game objects in the scene that are you're looking for, and then you can just select all of them easily using Control A or using your mouse, and then you have all of them together, and you don't have the risk of selecting game objects, for example, that you don't want to have. This is very useful. Another use case when you want to drag game objects into an array serialized field reference. So by default, the Unity editor has 3 search boxes we can use. 2 of them are located in the hierarchy panel of the editor layout, and one of them is in the scene view of the layout. And it's worth mentioning here that those 2 are in sync. So the hierarchy and scene search box are in sync. When you search in one of them, you will see the text you enter pops up in the other one as well, because it's basically the same thing. You are searching the active scene for game objects. And the third one is in the projects panel, where you search your assets. You can use it to find assets by name, all kind of assets, or by type. And you can use it to create favorites, for example, which is a very useful feature that not many people seem to be using from my experience. So I'm going to make sure to show you how you can do it. Let's go into the editor. And as I said, this is the default layout of the editor. And we have one search box down here in the projects panel. We have one here in the scene view, and we have one in the hierarchy view. And now if I search for camera, you can see that it filters for a camera game object. And you can see that in this scene view search box, we also have camera entered, so they are in sync. That's what I was talking about. And now we can do, for example, T and to filter by type, and then camera. And this will give us all of the game objects in the scene that have a camera attached. Obviously, this is the same result if we were to use just camera, because the game object has the word camera in its name. If you click on this small magnifier icon at the search box, you can see that we can actually also switch to search only by name or by type, or you can just leave it to all, and then you just use the T prefix to actually search for a specific type. I think that's more easy than restricting to us just searching by type. We have just one camera in the scene, so let me search, for example, for all game objects that have the component invader attached. And now we can see two interesting things. We can see that all of the game objects are here. If I click on any, I can see that the invader component is attached to it. And another cool thing I can see is that the scene view has changed its appearance, and it's now highlighting the game objects that are actually part of my search result. So if I remove the search query again, we can see that everything returns back to normal. If I search for game objects with the specific type, we can see that those game objects get highlighted. Now, if I search for UFO, just number one, then I can see that only the game object of that name is actually colored here, and I can clearly see where it is in space. This can be very useful. Now, in the projects panel, we can see we have some assets here, and same thing, I can search for invader, and then I get more results, obviously, because I have different types of assets that have the word invader in there. But I can also actually I cannot I'm sorry, I cannot search in here for my own types. So down here the types are restricted. So if you click on this little icon here, you can see that we can search only, for example, for type texture or type material and so on and so forth. But down here we cannot search for our own types. That will not work. That will just filter by script, and then we can see that we get the invader script here, for example, or we can just use our invader name and it will be somewhere in the search results. And now let's see, I can, for example, let's say I want to create a favorite that shows me all the scripts. So I can search for type script, and then I can just select this little star icon here, save search. This will create a new saved search to the left. And then we can call it all scripts or whatever you like. And now you can just click on it and it will repeat the query you've been doing to get that result. So if I select this, all materials, you can see the search box adjusts and we get all materials. We can click again on all scripts and we get all of the scripts in our assets. So remember to use the search feature to filter objects, to find assets, and especially to find stuff in the active scene or filter for game objects that are relevant to your current task. So enough about search. We will be returning to search later for when we introduce quick search and when we introduce labels. Labels. What are labels? Labels are like hashtags in Twitter or Facebook, for example. Basically, just tags you can use to yeah, identify your objects, give them a meaning, for example, and just organize your game objects. Labels are a feature that's often overseen or not used, at least from my experience, but it gets really useful once your project grows in size and when you just need to find some way of organizing your objects and knowing what object is what's the purpose of an object is, and so on and so forth. So labels can be assigned in the Unity editor to any game objects or to any asset you have. And as I mentioned, they are especially useful as well for not only for finding stuff and uh, searching for stuff. It's very useful for people who join your project, for example, to understand the meaning of an object. So you, as the game designer or the creative mind behind a project, you might know what everything from your heart, but for others, it might not be obvious that a game object or prefab is a weapon. So if it's a weapon, you can assign it the label weapon, and then people will know. Oh, look, this is a weapon. So without any further ado, let's look at Unity and see what this looks like. So if we are back in Unity, we can just open, for example, any game object in here. Let's take the mothership. And if I select the mothership, I can see that it has the labels character and invader assigned down here in the bottom right corner. And that's because I obviously already assigned those labels. How do I do that? You click to the right bottom corner of the Unity editor. There's a label button, and then you just click it, and then you can select any of the already existing labels, for example. And if you want to create your own label, you can just type into it my label and hit enter, and it gets assigned to your object. And now to your asset. And now you can use the L prefix filter in the search bar to search for labels. And if I now enter my label, we see that we have the mothership, the search results. We can also do invader here, and then we get all the prefabs that are invaders. And this is very useful when you have a lot of stuff and you want to create some sort of you want to drag them into an array, or you want to just find all the invader assets, and that's how you do it. And you can of course save this as a favorite now, and that's it. That's how labels work. Let's take a quick look at quick search. Quick search is a Unity package available via Unity Package Manager that just enhances the built-in vanilla search capability of Unity, and is really really awesome. And as I don't see many people using it yet, I wanted to make sure to just introduce it to you. As I said, you can get quick search via Unity Package Manager. Once you install it, it will ask you about your project. It will be asking about the size of your project roughly, because it can then configure itself appropriately. It will build and search index depending on your project's configuration. Of course, you can change this configuration at any time later on. Once you've got quick search installed, you can use Alt Shift and O to open the quick search panel. And basically what happens is you can search anything in there. We will see it in action in a second. And we can use it once again to search for assets efficiently. And with quick search, we get to extend the search capabilities by writing our own search result providers, for example. We can be querying a remote API, we can do fancy stuff with our by searching for it. We can implement our own search filter prefix, for example. I don't know. Um, in my case, invader colon something, and then I would execute some special search only targeting invaders, for example. So without any further ado, let's take a quick look at quick search itself. Back to Unity now. If I, as I said, if I press Alt Shift O, this quick search panel shows up, and I can start typing and search, for example, for invader. And we can see once again, this will search for anything. And what's the difference here, for example, is that quick search will also search in paths. So it will even display maybe a folder path that doesn't have assets inside that have invader, for example, but it will um, search for paths as well. And once again, we can also use labels here. So we can search for the label invader and we get our mothership and UFO again. We can search by type for materials and we can search basically anything. It's searching in our scene. It's searching. We can click this icon here, the magnifier, and then we can see what's everything enabled right now. It's searching assets, the current scene hierarchy. It's searching objects, menus, settings. So this goes way beyond the vanilla search capabilities. We can even use calculator, for example, to do quick calculations, and then quick search will compute the result for us. As I said, you get it via Unity Package Manager. Quick search, there is some samples you can import with some advanced scenarios, like for example implementing your own uh, search result providers and so on and so forth. Make sure to check it out because quick search for me has become the default way of searching my project. Another cool way to organize your project is maybe something you're not thinking about in the first place because it's so obvious, but it's actually folder structure. There is several sources on the internet. You can just search for Unity folder structure and you will find different approaches. So what I'm going to show is just my way of doing it, and there's for sure room for improvement, but it's just what I recommend for doing. And you can of course always check out other sources. So in general, it's important to think about folder structure before you start your project. I mean, perfectly, you will have a folder structure from a previous project you can just reuse and establish across your projects and make it like a guideline for all of your projects. Folders help you to group assets by domain. They help to find others what they're looking for, of course, next to search, and they establish a scalable and maintainable project and organization as the project grows. Here's some of my key recommendations before we dive into the demo. So I mean, don't put your own assets in the root assets directory because it gets cluttered really fast, and it's against our approach of having a clean project and organizing stuff into folders where they belong to. So don't put your stuff into the root assets folder. At the root level, there should only be actually other folders. There is some exemptions, and that's assets that are created by Unity or created by some tools or whatever, but don't put your own ones in there. And try to not create, I see this very often, all encompassing folders like materials on a root level. So usually when people start working with Unity, they will actually have a folder materials, models, textures, scripts, and so on, whatsoever. And they will just sort things in there. And then at some point, if your project grows, you will have a materials folder that has maybe 100, 200 materials inside that belong to completely separate assets, and it's going to be a nightmare. So try and avoid that. I will show how you can do it, for example, instead. And when you are working on a project, you can create. I've actually read this somewhere on the internet and I really liked it and established it into my projects. You can create sandbox directories. So just create a directory sandbox for everything that you're unsure about. You're not sure whether it will make it into the final product. And you can just put anything in there. And once it matures and you're ready to make it a fully fledged feature, then you can just move it into a appropriate folder. And if there's multiple people on your project, you can, for example, create a sandbox underscore and your initials folder, like sandbox underscore df would be my initials. And then everyone knows this is Dino's sandbox folder, and I'm just playing around in there. So nothing serious in there. And try to think in domains or features instead of categories when creating folders. I will talk about that in a minute, but it it goes back to, again, not thinking in categories and not creating all encompassing folders. Instead, think about a feature, think about a domain of your product, of your game or whatever, and try to put your stuff into folders that on a high level group them to a specific feature or domain. So let's take a look at my Unity project right now. So as you can see here, I have this is of course not a very big project yet, but I'm already starting to establish my own rules here. So in the root assets directory, there's just a few folders. There's Mixed Reality Toolkit generated because Mixed Reality Toolkit generates it, obviously. There's samples which are imported from some other Unity asset store package. I'm sorry, Unity package manager packages. There's my own folder in here, and there's Text Mesh Pro assets and so on and so forth. So as you can see, I haven't created anything except this folder myself inside here. Now, what I usually do is I create a root folder in the assets root that's actually my stuff. So in spatial invaders, I will put everything that's my own assets that I'm working on, that I created or optimized or whatever. If I take a model from a third party and then optimize it or change it, then I will put it into my own folder because it's changed. It's not anymore a third party state. It's my customized state. And this helps with organizing your projects because a lot of Unity Asset Store packages will create folders on the root level, and this can become a mess really fast. Now, if you look at this package folder here and unhide all the packages, you can see, for example, now that Mixed Reality Toolkit is supporting UPM, we are saving on some folders inside our assets directory because they now live inside the separate package directory. But previously, we would have like a 3 or 4 Mixed Reality Toolkit folders at the root level. And this is just one example. It can really, really get cluttered. So it's way more easy for you to create one folder for your own stuff and then inside there put your own stuff. And then even if you don't keep track of dependencies in where you put your own stuff and where other stuff is, you will always know inside this folder, this is the core of my project, this is what I've been working on, and that will help a lot. So as you can see, I created inside this folder, which usually also declares the root namespace for all my scripts. And then inside there, I have, for example, the invaders, which are the enemies in the game, basically down here. And then I have scripts. I didn't even create a scripts folder because I decided to put them in the root directory and then group other stuff in other directories. So you don't have to make a scripts folder necessarily. So inside here, I have two types of invaders defined already. One is the mothership and one is the unidentified flying object. And as you can see in there, I have everything that's related to mothership. So I have the prefab, I have this material I'm using in there, and I have my scriptable object asset, which defines the mothership's health, for example. Same thing goes for the UFO. There's some stuff in there. everything grouped together. Now, if I want to extract a Unity package for someone to take a look at or to share something with someone, it's now super easy to just share this invaders folder, and everything that's related to invaders is in there. And then actually, it's super easy to share that package. If you have all encompassing folders, then actually, when you share a package, there will be like a folder materials, scripts, textures, whatever, and they will be scattered around across your project, and then exporting Unity packages can become really hard and cumbersome for others to use. And this way, they will get a pretty clean import hierarchy in folder wise. So that's how you can work with folders. As I said, you can find your own way. It's just important to find a way to group your folders and then stick to it. Naming conventions are just as important as folder structure and any other tool we've been talking about, because they can help us once again to optimize our search results, keep the project maintainable and clean, and group assets on a sort of secondary level. In all of my projects, I still find myself being inconsistent and using different naming from time to time for some sorts of assets. But I'm currently trying to implement this Unity style guide I found on GitHub. A lot of people I know are using it as well, and we will take a look at it in a second. But still, it's a process. It's just important to think about it and make use of it, because it just helps you to have another tool in your hands to find things efficiently and keep the project clean and tidy. Now let's take a look at my Unity project once again, just real quick. We have our seed, and then, for example, I have defenders, and then we will see that for code assets, I'm using the regular C# naming conventions, and for all other types of assets, I'm using this convention I mentioned earlier, that's using small letters and camel case where needed to distinguish stuff and group stuff. So, for example, I have projectile. Now, if I search for projectile underscore, then I have all of my projectile related assets at hand, which is really useful. Let's take a look at this GitHub repository I mentioned. So you can find it on GitHub. It's called still w watcher slash Unity style guide, and it has a lot of good stuff. It has some things I don't agree with, especially the folder structure, directory stuff, and structure stuff. But for the naming, I found it kind of yeah, intuitive, and I like it, so I implement it. You can take a look at it and pick the stuff you need. Once again, this is not a golden rule. You just have to find your own rule, but be consistent with it. I will post a link to this GitHub repository uh, at the end of the presentation, of course. Can't talk about project organization without talking about prefabs, at least for a minute. So let's take a look at prefabs for a second. All of you should be familiar with the concept of prefabs, and more so with nested prefabs. Nested prefabs were introduced in 2017.3, I think. Not sure. It was a huge celebration back then on Unite because it was one of the most requested features by Unity users, and now it's been here for a while. It's matured, and it's a crazy useful feature. You can use prefabs to split your work into manageable chunks when working on a team, share behavior and visuals among several composite game objects, for example, and also to avoid merge conflicts. So when you have a scene, try and make as many things as possible prefabs, because even if your scene, you should be able basically to reconstruct your scene with a breeze by using prefabs in general. That's a rule of thumb kind of I'm sticking to, because prefabs, they can be worked on independently. You might get merge conflicts in scenes, but in prefabs, if you split them in logical pieces and then let everyone on the team work on a specific part of that parent prefab, then you will not run into any merge conflicts, and it's super easy and convenient to work with. So yeah, just a really quick and short demo. I'm not going in too much into prefabs because it's such a important pillar of Unity if you want. So if you haven't worked with prefabs yet, or don't feel comfortable around prefabs and nested prefabs, you should definitely check those out. Now let's take a look at, for example, weapons. I have a laser blaster and I have a laser blaster semi-automatic weapon. So if you take a look at the laser blaster, we can see that laser blaster is a prefab, and it has some game objects, some mono behaviors, components on it, and so on and so forth. And now, if we take a look at the semi-automatic laser blaster, we will see that it's basically just I just took the laser blaster prefab and made a variant of it. Variants are another concept introduced when nested prefabs were introduced. So please note down variants, nested prefabs, and prefabs. You should take a look at those. And for the laser blaster semi-automatic, basically I just changed this weapon data that goes into my weapon script, and that way I basically do an override to the default laser blaster and change the behavior of this weapon. That's just a very simple and easy example of how to use prefabs. As you can see in my scene here to the left, I have no prefabs, but all of these objects are game objects are generated. Two of them from the mixed reality toolkit. One is the default directional light that's created when a new scene is created, and the other two are created by some custom extension services of mine. So no need to make those prefabs as they get regenerated. Another very important topic that we just get to scratch the surface for due to time restrictions is version control. I still can't believe how many people I see that don't use version control with their Unity projects and have no idea what it is actually. So, for those of you who know it, just ignore, or maybe you can find something else to learn. But for those of you who don't know about version control, here's just a quick introduction to what version control means for you basically and what you can use it for. You can use version control to save and back up your work, collaborate effectively on projects in a distributed team, for example, and work on things without breaking other things. And that's the most important thing for me. So many people think if they are working solo, if they are a solo developer on a game or anything, then they don't need version control as they are the only ones working on it. That's not true. Version control will help you not to break things and to get a clear history of when you changed things and what you changed. So if something stops working and you know it has been working previously, it will be much more easy for you to identify the issue and find when things went wrong. So please I'm sorry, do yourself a favor and take a look at version control. Unity has recently acquired Plastic SCM, which is a version control system optimized for game development. I haven't tried it myself yet, but they have a free tier now since Unity bought them, and you can give them a try. Compared to Git, which is another open source version control system, Plastic SCM comes with some optimized workflows for example, artists who don't want to get too much into details that are only relevant to developers, and so on and so forth. They have some nice apps you can install on your machine that visually help you to learn version control and understand it. And you can lock files, for example, if you want to tell others on your team it's just you and only you working on this file, then you can lock the file and others won't be able to do any changes to it. When using Git, which I use personally, I recommend using Git and LFS for Unity projects. LFS stands for Large File System, and that just means that instead of checking your large files directly into the repository, they will be hosted on a separate storage container, basically, and each of your large files gets a GUID, an identifier that can be used to hash changes in your files, and it will make basically the checkout process and check-in process for large files much more faster for you, since you can't anyways differentiate those files. So if it's binary files, then Git will not be able to show you the difference between a previous state and a current state. I don't really have a demo for version control. I just want to tell you there is a on GitHub git/git ignore. They have a repository where you can check out recommended git ignore file for Unity projects that shows which folders to ignore when using Git with Unity. There's also GitHub for Unity/Unity Git attributes recommendation, which is a good starter file for using LFS. Basically, this just tells Git which of the files to put into large file storage instead of into the repository. And also, it's the same team working on this. There is a GitHub for Unity tool that you can use to use Git right out of the Unity editor. Again, I haven't tried this one, but you should check it out as it's integrated into Unity. But of course, you can use any other Git GUI for working with Git. I personally use Fork, for example. Mono behaviors. We all know them, we all love them, and we all love to hate them, I guess. Let's talk about mono behaviors. One thing that I find rather funny is the following quote I took from the official Unity documentation, which says mono behavior is the base class from which every Unity script derives. When you use C#, you must explicitly derive from mono behavior. Now, in my opinion, this is just wrong. I mean, the first sentence is okay, kinda, but the second one is just misleading, and I'm really surprised they haven't changed this yet, because it just leads new people coming to Unity to believe that whatever you do in C# in Unity, it has to derive from a mono behavior, which is just not the case. Not every script, class, piece of logic you write needs to be a mono behavior. Use mono behaviors only for your visual layer, and when you absolutely need those Unity messages handled in your script, like awake, start, update, and so on and so forth. But even for that, there's ways to improve, which we will see later. So just remember to really, really, really question every mono behavior you implement in general. Does this really need to be a mono behavior? Let's take a look in my Unity project. I actually have mono behaviors attached to, for example, my mothership. So as you can see, it has this take damage, health, invader. Those are mono behaviors that are currently attached to this game object. Now we could, I'm pretty sure we could make take damage work without being a mono behavior. Health maybe even as well, but for that we would have to have a different approach to how we separate visuals and logic. But in general, um, try to avoid them. Now let's take a look at this invader script, which is a mono behavior once again, but it's driven by, for example, this invader data, which is a scriptable object which defines its properties. And we will talk about scriptable objects as well in a second. Now, one script I created, which is the projectile pool service, which is just a service that manages a pool of projectiles. So I don't have to recreate projectiles a new instance every time I shoot, I can just take them from a pool of already created and instantiated instances and then reuse them whenever I need them. And this is what our projectile pool service does in this case. And as you can see, it derives from base extension service because I'm using the mixed reality toolkit here, and then this one derives from base service, and this one is just implementing some interfaces. So no modal behaviors here, and this still works. Of course, now I hear you say the way mixed reality toolkit works, it's still all based the service locator and services are based on on a single mono behavior, which we can find in our Unity scene on the mixed reality toolkit game object here. There is a service locator attached, and it's a mono behavior, and it will forward all the Unity events like awake and destroy and update in some way to the extension services. But this is still a major improvement compared to making everything a mono behavior, because in our scene we only have one mono behavior attached to our game object mixed reality toolkit, for example, and then everything else below is just plain C sharp, and which makes it also much more manageable. And even you can extract that code into other engines, possibly other C sharp powered engines, and reuse it over there, so you're not tied to Unity. So to make it short, because I don't have time, really question every mono behavior you create and wonder whether it really needs to be a mono behavior. Scriptable objects are next on our list. A scriptable object is a data container that you can use to save large amounts of data independent of class instances. That's what the Unity documentation says, and it's true in this case. So we can use scriptable objects to save on memory usage because the data is just stored once in memory. We can use them to create editor extensions, for example, and easily manage application and game configuration. If you are familiar with the mixed reality toolkit, then the configuration profiles that are used for the different services of the toolkit, they are basically just scriptable objects that are saved into an asset, and then you can use them to configure the services. And yeah, that leads us to our next point. So we can save scriptable objects into assets. That means also we can check them into version control, which makes it much more maintainable and understandable when changes are happening and why my game or application is behaving differently. Maybe because someone changed the balancing or the configuration. So we can use scriptable objects in general to store some sort of information we will need during runtime to configure our runtime components. Let's see what this looks like in my case. So in my case, I have this invader data mothership object, for example. This is a unscriptable object asset. So we can see that it has a property health 200. It defines the health of my mothership. I also have an UFO, and we can see I have 100 health here. So same scriptable object script, but different assets that are used to power my invaders. Now, if you look at the mothership prefab, we can see that the invader script is taking a data input of the type invader data to configure it itself and see how much health this invader has. Currently, the invader data only contains health, but it can contain other stuff as well. So let's take a look at a more extended example. We have projectile data as well. So for our projectile laser, we have damage per hit, hits to live, time to live, speed, and so on. So let's take a look at this in code. It's just a script that derives from scriptable object, and it has these fields, these serialized fields that get saved into the asset. And this one is used inside our Unity project. For example, in the projectile laser prefab, it's used again as a data input to the projectile script. And if we now look at that script, we can see that it's using the data to configure itself and yeah, behave. It defines how it behaves when the game is running, how many hits do we have until to live, and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's it about scriptable object. I'm gonna shorten it here. And please make sure to take a look at scriptable objects and make sure to ask any questions later if you have any. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time now and have to stop at this point. Truth is, this session is much more in depth. It was meant to be much more in depth, but I realized it's going to be really hard to cram everything into 40 minutes. I hope you could take some takeaways, at least a rough overview of the stuff you need to look into to organize your project and start using advanced techniques to make your project maintainable and scalable. I will make sure to post in depth sessions about each of the topics. And until then, I have a list of a few more topics you can look into that I couldn't cover now, which is using service locator pattern in Unity and looking into scene management. For example, having a base scene and using additive scene loading to load your other scenes. This is another very, very useful tool for splitting work, for making things more dynamic and scalable. And you should really stop thinking in terms of each scene is one level and I'm always switching in between scenes, and start to master the scene management in Unity. Of course, the Mixed Reality Toolkit can't be unmentioned here because you should really take a look at it. It's going to help you to leverage all of the suggested stuff, because actually the Mixed Reality Toolkit is implementing tons of cool stuff and advanced coding patterns that are mentioned throughout this presentation. So if you want, take a look at the Mixed Reality Toolkit and see how they are working with scriptable objects, how they are handling mono behaviors, and so on and so forth. Until then, goodbye, and I'm excited to see if you have any questions.
So, hey, Dino. Thank you so much for this great talk. Give me a second. I cannot hear you.
Sorry, it was my microphone.
Yes, now I can hear you. Hey, thank you so much. Super, super interesting talk. Lots of great tips.
Thank you.
I have one question from the audience. Let's see. Hasham asked at the very beginning of your talk, is there any way to search game objects with the same materials?
There is unfortunately not a way to search for game objects with the same material, but what you can do is you can right click on your material in the projects panel, and then there is a menu item, find references in scene, and that will give you all objects in the scene that are using that material. So that's one way to do it, but there is not really a search-based option where you can just type in a material name and then you get all of the assets objects using it. There is extensions in the asset store for that, but it's not out of the box possible right now.
Okay, cool. And another question, talking of version control. So you probably know that merging scene files can often be an issue. Is there, and now you said plastic, was bought. So do you see any improvement happening in that area?
There isn't an improvement in that area by definition. It's just once Unity introduced nested prefabs, this issue became much less prominent, because if you think about prefabs, then they become a way of avoiding merge conflicts in scenes, because if everyone can work on their prefabs and essentially the scenes. So in general, the rule of thumb is you should be able to recreate your scene by dropping prefabs into the scene. And if you go by that rule, you will rarely have any merge conflicts in the scene, because all of the changes happen in the prefabs. And usually there's always one developer working on one prefab. And so again, we are avoiding merge conflicts here. But there is neither Git nor Plastic SCM will help with avoiding merge conflict in scene. But Plastic SCM will allow you, for example, to lock a scene, and then no one can edit it. And that's one way to letting others know that, okay, someone's working on this and I can't make any changes, because that will lead to merge conflicts. Yeah.
Right. Great. Thank you. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you again very much for this really, really great talk. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.